going to be talking about the Borgias today. This is part of what I've been calling my television addiction series, in which I go through and talk about all the TV programs I was watching in 2011 and 2012 when I was living in Cambodia and watching way too many DVDs. For more information on exactly what this series is and why I'm doing it, I'll link to a video and a blog post in the description down below. But for today, I'm going to be talking about the Borgias. Now, this is, actually, I should clarify, there were a couple TV series about the Borgia family that came out around the same time. But this is the more famous one, the Borgias, 2011 Showtime series starring Jeremy Irons and some other people. And it's a historical drama. And as such, is often compared to other cable historical dramas, which are Rome and the Tudors. And I think those are the big ones. I know there have been some other minor ones, but I think those are the big ones. I mean, let me know in the comments if I'm missing something. So, by way of comparison then, let me briefly talk about the other TV series in this category. Rome came out in 2005. I was in Japan at the time, and it made its way to the DVD shop in Japan eventually, but it took a while. So it was one of those shows that I was hearing a lot before I got around to seeing it. And I was hearing a lot of chatter both among friends, but I was also hearing, you know, there was articles in the Washington Post talking about how wonderful this show was and stuff like that. And I had been led to believe by a lot of this chatter that it was really very historically accurate, because that's what people were saying. Even in mainstream media publications, they were saying, oh, it's so historically accurate. And it's not completely inaccurate, but if you're a history buff and you know your stuff, you can tell right from episode 1 there's so many inaccuracies and time being collapsed and all this stuff going on. Now, this period of history, the end of the Roman Republic, is one of my periods. I don't have a lot of them, but this is one of them. It's one of the periods I really know a lot about. So I was watching this, and all these inaccuracies were just jumping out at me. And, you know, to be fair, they did get a lot accurate, but there was just so much stuff that was inaccurate that it just bothered me, and I think prevented me from fully enjoying the TV series. And then also, the second season tried to pack way too much stuff in and was just burning through material way too fast and compressing events way too much. And I think that was because the creators of the show knew that they were getting canceled after 2 seasons, so they had like 4 seasons worth of plot lines that they had planned out, which they just compressed into the second season. So it wasn't completely the creators' fault. Then the Tudors. Now, Henry VIII is somebody I know a little bit about, but not a lot. Most of my knowledge of Henry VIII comes from a couple sources I've reviewed on this channel. One, the BBC radio series, This Sceptred Isle, and 2, Monarchy by David Starkey. And then picked up a few bits of odds and ends elsewhere. But those are mainly where I know about the life of King Henry VIII, and I guess of the 2 of those, Monarchy by David Starkey gives maybe a more detailed picture of his reign. I don't want to talk about the Tudors too much because this is a video on the Borgias, and because I will be talking about the Tudors on a later television addiction video. I'll have a whole separate video for that. But I was, on the whole, very impressed with the historical accuracy of the Tudors. And I know this is all comparative, meaning, of course, it's not completely historically of course it's not completely historically accurate. I mean, of course it's not completely historically accurate. They take so many liberties, but to my eye, they were mostly minor liberties. There were a couple major ones they took. For example, getting rid of one of Henry VIII's sisters who married the King of Scotland, and that ended up having ramifications all throughout the series. But mostly I thought it was very minor liberties they were taking, and the story of Henry VIII's reign played out more or less like it does in history. I'm not an expert, but that was my impression. And then we come to the Borgias. Now, I should make a confession. I've gotten some pushback on this channel in the past for calling myself a history buff, despite the fact that there are wide gaps in my historical knowledge. And this has to be admitted as one of them. I had no idea who or what the Borgias were before this show came out, or before the buzz around this show started generating. I mean, I guess to be fair to myself, it's not one of my periods. I know ancient history, I know 19th century and 20th century history. I know the British history fairly well, kind of all the way through. Not fairly well. I know the British history a little bit. But continental history in the Renaissance period is one of my blind spots. And yeah, this is Italy during the Renaissance, and it's about the Pope, whose name I forget, Pope Alexander something or other, who's more famously known as the Borgia. He's the Borgia family, played by Jeremy Irons in the Showtime series, which is infamous for being one of the most, or the most, corrupt popes in history. Although corrupt really doesn't even seem to do justice to it. I mean, corrupt just implies that maybe he's taking bribes on the side. Evil popes in history, just up to all sorts of evil. Although if you look this up, or if you get into it, it's debated by historians how much of all the legends that grew up surrounding him are true, and how much of it was embellished over time. Because historians don't actually believe that half of the legends attached to this family are actually true. They didn't really poison all the people that they're accused of having poisoned, etc. But regardless, they by anybody's accounting, they were not nice people. And here they are, the head of the Holy Roman Church, the head of Christendom. Now, if you're a skeptic, like I am, then this has a bit of a polemical edge, a subversive edge. And this came out during the period when I was more of an angry skeptic than I am now. I've kind of feel like I've gotten it all out of my system for the most part nowadays. But back then I was looking to pick fights with religious people. And this struck me as the perfect drama to show just how corrupt the papacy was. I actually grew up in a Protestant environment, but my perception of my environment, or maybe mainstream Protestantism in America nowadays, is that there is a reverence for the Pope and for the papacy. Obviously, the Pope is not a Protestant, but I think, 400 years ago, in Protestant churches, the Pope would have been the Antichrist. And by the way, interesting little historical tidbit that I picked up on Wikipedia or somewhere. I think that Protestant habit of calling the Pope the Antichrist originated during the papacy of the Borgias. He was just so hated by Protestants. But anyways, that historical legacy of Protestants hating the Pope is gone, at least in American mainstream Protestantism. The new enemy are those godless, commie secularists, and it's all Christians are now good Christians, and so people seem to really respect the office of the Pope, even in Protestant circles, or at least the ones I grew up in. And this reference usually it used to grate on me, because even though I didn't know who the Borgias were, anyone who knows anything about world history knows that the papacy has gone through some pretty dodgy spots during the Middle Ages, etc., where they were involved in a lot of temporal politics, and were not always serving the glory of God. So that was one of my pet peeves for a long time about how revered the office seemed to be in even Protestant circles. And I used to always say to people, I said, if you admire this particular pope, the current pope, for whatever good things he's done, that's fine. You can admire him as a person, but the idea of admiring the office of papacy, well, where does that come from? There have been so many horrible people who have been popes, and the popes have done so many horrible things that you can't possibly give any reverence to the office as such. So yeah, that's my little rant about that. So me and a whole bunch of people who probably have similar religious views to me were very intrigued when we found out the premise behind the show about this historically real person and his hugely evil and corrupt regime when he was the Pope, and the whole family he brought with him. Because it wasn't just the Pope, but it was his sons and his daughters who commanded his armies and who were helping him manipulate everything. And then, of course, Jeremy Irons is just a great actor. So all of which is to say that I came in with really high expectations. And not to mention the fact, even though I knew nothing about the Borgias, and even though there are huge gaps in my history knowledge, but by virtue of being what I would characterize myself as a history buff, I'm on board for this kind of stuff. I don't know anything about it, but I'd be really hungry for a drama which would teach me the history about it. Yeah, I find learning history through these types of dramas fascinating. And I regret to say that I was really bored by the Borgias TV series. I made it all the way through season 1. I made it halfway through season 2 before I just gave up. I was too bored, and I didn't really see the payoff that the series was lending. Part of the problem, as a lot of people have pointed out, is that although there's a lot of intrigue being hinted at, or a lot of intrigue happening, what you actually see on the screen, they don't really show a lot of the battles, or, granted they have a limited budget, but you don't really see a lot of the big events going down. You just have all this kind of intrigue and affairs and sexual politics and pillow talk, as I think I saw one reviewer describe it. So that can get a little bit boring. There are a lot of shocking murders, and there's a assassin in this show who is modeled on a real person. I guess the Borgias had an infamous guy who did a lot of their assassinating, and he is really cold-blooded and ruthless. But I said this in my review of Boardwalk Empire as well. If a show gets predictably bloodthirsty, I can find that just as boring as a show that doesn't have any killing in it at all. I felt like he was killing so many people that it wasn't even really much of a shock anymore. And then there was a historical accuracy. Now, the AV Club, in one of their reviews, called these types of dramas a Wikipedia drama, by which they mean you watch the episode and then you go to Wikipedia to check how much of it was real. And I read that description and I had a bit of a snobbish reaction to it, like, well, that's not me. I read books. But then I thought about it for not too long, and I realized actually that's exactly me. I am, for the Tudors and the Borgias especially, it's not my area of expertise. I don't have books laying around on this subject. I watch the episode and then I go to Wikipedia to check up on it. And if you're doing that, if you're watching the episodes and then going to Wikipedia to check up on them as you're watching them, the historical accuracy of the Borgias does not hold up very well. Now, I know all of these things are comparative. So meaning, sorry, I'm just going to check the time on the back of this. Okay, I've got plenty of time. All of these things are comparative. So there are some things they get right, there are some things they got wrong, and how much deviation is too much is a matter of subjective opinion, and is a matter of comparing them to the other things in their genre. How much did the Tudors get right or wrong? And it's a matter of what things did they get right or what things they did wrong. Were they big events or minor events? So it becomes really subjective really fast to talk about how historically accurate something is. And I mean how as in, is it very historically accurate or is it a little historically accurate? It's really hard to classify these things without going through point by point. And I'm especially at a disadvantage now because the whole nature of this video series is talking about TV shows I saw back in 2011 and 2012, good 9 or 10 years ago. Arguably, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't have embarked in this whole series, but here we are. And I find that I can no longer talk as intelligently about the historical inaccuracies in this series as I once could have. But my memory is getting more and more frustrated with how loosely it was based on history. And then by the middle of season 2, just feeling like there was no reason to keep watching it. And it strikes me that... see, the thing is, for all the faults that the show had, if it had been historically accurate, I would have kept with it. Because I would have thought, hey, I'm learning something. And, of course, it's a drama. It doesn't have to be 100% historically accurate. But if it had been mostly historically accurate, I would have stuck with it. And I would wager that there's a lot of people out there who are of the same mindset as me. If it's mostly historically accurate, if they can feel like they're learning something from the drama, it will make up for a lot of flaws. Which makes it all the more puzzling that Hollywood or Showtime or cable is leaning more and more towards going not in the historically accurate direction. Now, their calculation is obviously people want a more contrived plot. They don't want real history. But I would beg to differ. And I think shows like Rome or the Tudors showed that by more closely following history, you can engage the audience more. And shows like the Borgias, well, the Borgias got canceled after 3 seasons, but then what does that tell you, huh? Rome got canceled after 2 seasons. And I think the case with both Rome and the Borgias is it wasn't purely a matter of the numbers. It was a case of these historical dramas being too expensive to film. But I think a lot of people were like me, that they just realized the show had gone off the historical rails, and they decided, okay, I don't need to stick around for this any longer. It's getting boring anyways. The other interesting thing. I mentioned a review from the AV Club, but there's actually a couple reviews of the AV Club that have stuck with me over the years. And the other one, I'll link to both of them down below. But the other one said, you know, there's really nothing wrong with the Borgias. It had the misfortune to come out at the same time of Game of Thrones. And it said if it had come out a couple years before Game of Thrones, people would have been a lot more up for it. But they said now, because Game of Thrones is out there, every time you look at something on the Borgias, you can just say, well, okay, you've got some intrigue here, you've got some betrayal going on here, you've got some complicated politics going on or something like that, but Game of Thrones is just doing the same thing better. Better characters, more engaging storyline, more engaging plot. So why would anyone watch the Borgias when they could watch Game of Thrones? Or maybe they could watch both of them, but it can't help but pale in comparison to Game of Thrones. And I think that's true. And Game of Thrones, especially in the first few seasons, was absolutely amazing. And I will talk about Game of Thrones in my next television addiction video, because that is definitely something I'm building up to. But it did make me think as well while I was watching this, while I was reading that article, because Game of Thrones is completely made up history. You know, nothing is real. It's completely fantasy land. And yet it is so well done that people just really get addicted to not only watching the show, but to discovering the whole history and legend of this fictional kingdom. And that struck me as rather odd because, well, or I don't know, maybe it's not odd. It could be that the same impulse which makes us want to study history can lead us into fictional history just as much. But what am I talking about? I should save all this speculation for talking about my Game of Thrones review, which will be coming up. But for now, I'll close out on the Borgias.